October 24, 1944. Formosa Strait, off the
On
coast
Sunday,
of
December
Japanese-occupied
7,
Taiwan.
1941,
USS Tang,
shortly
a
before 8
Gato-class
a.m.,
submarine under
Japan
Commander
launched a
Richard
surprise
O'Kane,
attack on the
has
United
just
States
finished
of
the most
America
destructive
by
single
bombing
patrol
the
by
U.S.
any
naval
submarine
base
in
at Pearl
American naval
Harbor,
history.
Hawaii.
In 2 nights she has sunk multiple ships from a Japanese convoy,
The base
using
was
up
attacked
nearly
by
her entire
350
torpedo load.
Imperial
1
Japanese
torpedo
aircrafts.
remains. O'Kane
Though
fires
the
it at a
raid only
crippled
lasted
transport dead
75
ahead.
minutes,
The torpedo
Japanese
leaves the
destroyed
tube,
or
runs straight
damaged
for a few
nearly
hundred
20
yards, and then
American
curves.
naval vessels,
It is running in a
including 8
circle.
battleships
It is coming
and more
back.
than
20
340
seconds later, it
airplanes.
slams into
Over
Tang's own stern and
2,400
detonates.
Americans died in
The
the
most
attack,
successful
and many
American
more
submarine
were
of the war
wounded.
has just sunk herself with her own
While
weapon.
the attack on Pearl
Of a
Harbor
crew
was
of
a
87,
surprise,
only 9
tensions between
survive,
the U.S.
pulled
and
from the
Japan
water
had
by the same
deteriorated over
Japanese
the
ships
decade,
they had spent
in
2 nights
particular with
destroying,
regards to
and they spend
Japan's
the rest of the war as
expansion into
prisoners.
China.
This is the story of the Gato-class submarine, the vessel that came closer than any other single weapon system to strangling Japan's war economy on its own, and how a fleet that made up less than 2% of the United States Navy inflicted more damage on the enemy than almost anything else America built. To understand why boats like Tang existed at all, you have to start at Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Japan's carrier strike put much of the U.S. Pacific battle fleet on the ocean floor or in dry dock for months. Within hours of the attack, the Navy issued an order that would have been unthinkable a day earlier. Unrestricted submarine warfare against Japan, targeting merchant shipping without warning, the exact tactic the United States had condemned Germany for using against Britain. It was a decision born from necessity. With the battle line gutted, submarines were one of the only offensive weapons America had left in the Pacific, and the Gato-class, the first mass-produced American fleet submarine of the war, became the tool for waging it. The Gato-class was built for range most other navies never needed. At 311 feet long and roughly 1,525 tons surfaced, it could cross 11,000 nautical miles without refueling, run patrols lasting 75 days, and dive to a test depth of around 300 feet, deeper than almost anything Japan had a reliable way to detect. It was among the first American submarine classes with a fully welded pressure hull instead of riveted plating, which meant it could take depth-charge shock damage that would have opened a riveted hull like a tin can. It carried 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, and typically sailed with 24 torpedoes. Crucially, it was air-conditioned, not for comfort but because tropical heat in the Pacific was warping torpedo components and cooking crews alive on 75-day patrols. On paper, it was the most capable submarine in the world in 1942. In practice, for the first 18 months of the war, it was nearly useless because of what it was firing. The Mark 14 torpedo, standard issue for every Gato boat, had 3 separate design defects that the Navy's own Ordnance Bureau spent over a year denying. It ran roughly 10 feet deeper than set, passing harmlessly under enemy hulls. Its magnetic exploder, designed to detonate beneath a ship's keel, often failed to fire at all or detonated prematurely. And its backup contact exploder frequently failed on direct hits, especially the increasingly common perfect shots fired at a 90-degree angle. Submarine captains reported watching torpedoes strike enemy ships dead center and simply bounce off without exploding. It took the aggressive persistence of skippers like Dudley "Mush" Morton aboard USS Wahoo, and blunt field testing ordered by Charles Momsen, firing live torpedoes into a cliff face to prove the depth error, before the Bureau of Ordnance admitted the fault in the fall of 1943. The most advanced submarine class in the American arsenal had spent its first 2 years of war effectively fighting with dud ammunition. If you're enjoying this kind of deep dive into World War II naval history, subscribing helps a lot and make sure you catch the next one. Once the torpedo problems were fixed in late 1943, the Gato-class stopped being a promising weapon and became a devastating one. Wahoo, under Morton, had already shown what aggressive doctrine could do, breaking with pre-war caution to hunt inside a Japanese convoy at Wewak in January 1943 and sinking every ship in it, a first for any American submarine. That patrol reshaped Pacific submarine doctrine away from cautious, defensive patrolling and toward aggressive, sustained pursuit of merchant convoys, even at the cost of surfacing in daylight within range of escort fire. It's also worth noting plainly that the war at sea was brutal in ways documentaries sometimes soften. Some patrols, including Wahoo's, involved attacks on survivors in the water, a grim and controversial part of the historical record that the Navy itself investigated after the war. By 1944, with reliable torpedoes and battle-tested tactics, Gato-class boats and their successors were sinking Japanese shipping faster than Japanese shipyards could replace it. The numbers are almost hard to process. American submarines made up less than 2% of all U.S. Navy personnel in the Pacific, Yet they were responsible for roughly 55% of all Japanese shipping losses in the war, more than carrier aircraft, more than surface ships, more than land-based bombers combined. Over 1,300 Japanese merchant vessels were sunk, more than 5 million tons of shipping, along with a significant share of Japan's remaining warships. Oil tankers bringing crude from the East Indies back to the home islands were targeted specifically and relentlessly. By late 1944, Japan's fuel reserves were collapsing, its newest aircraft carriers were being launched without enough trained pilots or aviation fuel to use them effectively, and entire garrisons across the Pacific were being cut off and left to starve, not from lack of Japanese production, but from an inability to move anything by sea without a Gato-class boat finding it first. That success came at a brutal cost to the men fighting it. Submarine duty in the Pacific carried the highest casualty rate of any branch of the U.S. Armed Forces in the entire war. Of roughly 16,000 American submariners who went on war patrols, 52 boats were lost and around 3,500 men died, a loss rate above 20%, in a force that was entirely volunteer. Tang herself was one of those 52 boats, and Richard O'Kane, pulled from the water and taken prisoner after his own torpedo sank his ship, survived brutal treatment in a Japanese POW camp before returning home to receive the Medal of Honor for that final patrol, the same patrol that ended with his own weapon turning back on him. The Gato-class is rarely the centerpiece of Pacific War documentaries the way Midway or Iwo Jima are. There were no massed fleets, no headline battles, no newsreel footage of the fighting because almost none of it happened where cameras could see it. It was fought individually, boat by boat, mostly at night, mostly in silence, against an enemy that for most of the war didn't know exactly where the attack had come from. And it was arguably more decisive to Japan's defeat than any single surface battle in the entire Pacific campaign, because a war economy that cannot move oil, rice, or raw materials by sea cannot keep fighting, no matter how many aircraft or soldiers it still has on paper. Richard O'Kane's last torpedo circled back on the very ship that fired it, and in a strange way that captures the entire submarine war in miniature. A force so effective, so relentless, and operating at such close range to its own danger, that its greatest success and its worst disaster could happen 90 seconds apart, on the same night, from the same boat. Less than 2% of the Navy did more to bring Japan to its knees than almost anyone realized at the time, fighting a war most Americans back home never even knew was happening.